Hello guys, welcome back to RestAPI authentication service that we started a couple of months ago, and it has been a while since I worked on this project, so I'm picking up right from where we stop. In this very video, we want to start implementing the social authentication. We are going to be starting with the Google signing with Google feature. So we're going to be communicating with the Google API for authentication. All right, so that's what we'll be starting with, and then secondly, we'll also be using GitHub Auth as well, and then we'll be building a React frontend, simple React frontend to actually test out everything we'll be doing since regarding this authentication. All right, thank you guys for subscribing, and if you've not subscribed, this is a better opportunity for you to hit that subscribe button. All right, so let's start. So what we are going to do is, first step is to get our client ID and client secret from Google. So just go to the Google API console and select a project if you have an existing project, or simply create a new project. Then once you do that, the next step in the sidebar under APIs and services, select credentials, then click on configure consent screen. Choose an email address, specify a product name, and press save, and credentials. So this is all we'll be doing. So we're going to be following them. So I think I've already opened the Google console. So if you have not done that, you can just click on that link and it will take you to this point. So first, for this tutorial, let me just create a new project. This should be so let me call it rest_auth service. For organization, can leave it. So let's just create. Okay, the name has invalid characters. Enter numbers, hyphen. Okay, let's use hyphen instead. So hit create. All right, so this is creating for us. Okay, our project is created, so we can select the project that we just create. All right, so that's the project we create. So the next, let's configure consent screen, because that's the next step. So you can go there and configure our consent screen. So the consent screen is actually when the user clicks on that sign in or sign up with Google button from your front end, the page that is going to take them to. That is what this consent screen is all about. So what we need to do here is say choose how you want to configure and register your app, including your target users. User type internal. So let's choose external. Let's click on the create. So our app name, let's just call it REST API or Django. So here you can choose your email, and then we don't have a logo. So if we have a logo for a real-time application, we'll provide that here, but I don't have a logo, so I can just select app name, my email, to protect you and your users. So application home screens, but we don't have all these, we can leave all these out of it. Enter the same email. So that's all we need to do. So we can just hit save and continue. All right, so it's talking about the scope. It means what are the credentials that you want to retrieve when your user is successfully authenticated by Google. The default scope will actually just return the email, the names, and the email, the names, that's all. And that is okay for us. We don't need much. We just need the email and the username. We automatically will generate passwords for the users. So the default scope is okay. Test users, we don't need any test users, so we'll save. Summary, yeah, everything is fine. Let's back to dashboard. All right, so we have our consent screen, which we can always edit if we want to. Then is a test application for now. So if we are going live, this obviously we have to publish it, provide our domain and all that. So come over to credentials. Under credentials, click on create credentials. Then select Auth client ID, because that's what we are looking for, the client ID. All right, so select the app type. It's going to be web application. So the name of our web application, I can leave that by default. Then our JavaScript, authorized JavaScript origin. So we're going to put in the domain name for now is localhost. So this we can put 8,000. Then we can add multiple as well. So we can just put front end domain. All right. So this is like for the front end and this back end. So for the redirect, we don't really need that. I think that's all. So we can click on create, and this will take a couple of minutes. All right. So once it's created, a client ID and a client secret is generated for you, and you can see status is enabled. That's good. So you can actually download this, or you can just copy it into application. So copy your client ID and move over to your app. In your settings.py file, you can just provide this at the bottom, Google client ID. All right. So for the client ID as well, you can copy this, and for the client secret, and we can say Google client secret. Let's paste this as well. All right. I think that's all we need to do here. We have our client ID, we have our client secret. All right. So the first thing first is on our user model, we are going to add one more feed, which we are going to call Auth provider. So this is just going to be a simple char feed. I'm going to provide a default. All right. So what I'm going to do is just above user class, I'm going to paste a dictionary of providers that we can use. So that's it. Auth providers dictionary. We have email. So when the auth provider is email, it means it's using our own authentication system. All right. And when the provider is Gmail, it means that the user is actually connected to a platform using Google Sign Up. Then if the auth provider for a user is GitHub, we know that user was connected to a platform through GitHub. Same as well for Facebook. Default is going to be auth provider.get, which is the dictionary method, and we want to get the value email. So by default, when users sign up into our platform using our own sign up endpoint, they are email providers. All right. So their auth provider is going to be email, except they are coming with Google sign up or GitHub sign up. All right. So that's the little changes we're going to make here. We're going to make migration, turn manage.py, make migrations. All right, a field added. So let's migrate. So manage.py migrate. All right. Okay. So our migration was applied. All right. So for us to implement the Google sign up, we are going to be following the latest Google documentation for authentication. And I'm going to be leaving links to this in my description so that you can follow the docs along in case you have any bugs. If you go through the docs, they actually recommend a client SDK for different tech stack for us to use. So the Google API client library for Python, we are going to be installing that, which is the Google API Python client. All right. So this is what is recommended from the docs to actually communicate with the Google API. All right. So this is the docs we'll be using. All right, one more thing, because we are in a test mode, we have to provide a test user. So that test user that we actually ignored, we need it because we're in a test mode, so it's restricted for us to provide test users. So let's just put a couple of test email address here that we can use for testing. So here I'm just going to put Henry. So this had to be an actual email address, so a reactive email address. All right, so those two email addresses are okay, so we can save those two email addresses. We'll use this as our test users. Next, let's go and install our client library. All right, so back to this Python client. So we are going to be installing it using pip. So for the installation guide is actually using pip. So pip install google-api/python client. So pip install that. So we just grab this, head over to our terminal here. The SDK has finished installing, so you can see successfully installed. So we can go to our code now and start working. So let's just bring this into these two credentials into our environment variable, and in here we'll provide the alright. So the Google client and secrets are secure. Alright, so before we go into writing code, so let's also understand the workflow of how Google Authentication actually works for basically server-side application. There are several ways we can implement Google Authentication, but look at this simple diagram that they have in their docs here, which give us a very simple illustration on how we can use this signing with Google on our backend with our backend application. So what we are going to do is look at the diagram. So the first step is that once we have that Google button displaying on our client application, when the user clicks on that button, a request is sent to the Google authorization endpoint. All right. So that authorization endpoint will now prompt the user a dialog box whether to accept this request or not. So when the user accepts the request, Google sends a one-time code to our client. All right. So once it sends this one-time code to our client can easily exchange this one-time code with an access token and a refresh token. So if you are not using a server-side application, they can easily just send the one-time codes to Google server directly, and an access token and a refresh token will be sent back to them, which they can use to retrieve the user's information from Google backend. All right. So for most React applications that use Google directly without no backend, actually stops at this level. Once they get the access token and refresh token, they can use the access token to get the user's information from Google and display it on their site and use it on their site. All right. So once the access token expires, they are logged out. When they need to get login again, they make the same request and all that. But because we are having a backend system, we are going to be doing it a little bit different, in a sense that once we send that one-time code to Google server and we retrieve both the access token, but we are not going to be using their own access token and refresh token. Though their access token and refresh token is also JWT token, but we are not going to be using their own token. This ID_token is an optional token that is sent along by Google. This token contains the user's basic profile information. So what we are going to do is that once Google returns the access token and the ID_token to us, we are going to verify the ID token and decode it, get that basic information, which is the user's email and the user's name. We are going to use those information to create the user's credentials or the user's information on our own backend system. All right. So that we have that user as a registered user in our own backend system. We only specify the auth provider as Google. All right. Then we also create our own JWT token in our own backend system that the user will be using to authorize other endpoints on our own API. All right. We'll just specify the provider to be Google. So that's the mechanism we are going to be doing. It's a little bit tricky, but we'll see. We're going to do it together. So if you really want to learn how the other methods you can implement Google Auth, you can carefully read through their docs. What we are going to do is in our Auth, we are going to create a module that's going to handle Google login. So we can call it UTs, you can call it helpers, or you can even call it Google. So let me just call it UTs. So in this UTs file, we are going to make in some imports. So we're going to say from google.auth.transport, we want to import requests. So we are not using basic Python requests, we are using the request from the Google SDK that we installed. Then we're also going to make another import, say from google.auth. From google.auth2, we want to import the ID_token. So this is what we'll be using to verify our token. Then another thing is that we want to import our user model. So we can say from account.models, we want to import our user model. They also want to import from Django.contrib, Django.contrib.auth. We want to import our authenticate. Alright, then let's import Django settings to use our say from Django.conf import settings. Alright, I think the last one we're going to import is from rest_framework.exception. We want to import authentication fee. Alright, so this is our basic import. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a simple class. We're going to call this class Google. Alright, so this is a simple class that is going to contain our basic validate method. Alright, validate method, which is going to validate our token. So let's just pass in an argument in here as access token. You can use any name for the argument. This is just a basic function argument. Alright, so say access token. So what this method is going to do is it's going to help us verify the token. Alright, that token is actually coming from Google before we can start using it. Alright, so we're going to make this a static method so that we don't have to instantiate the class before we can use it. Alright, so we just do static method. Alright, this one is coming from Python. So within this function, we are going to do a try and catch. Sorry, try and accept. Except there's an exception. We want to just basically return, you can say exception as E. So in here, we want to basically return a very simple string of say token is invalid or has expired. So within this catch block is where we're actually going to be doing the logic. So we're going to get the information from the ID underscore token that we get here dot verify. So you can see it has verify underscore firebase. That's if you are using firebase token, but we are using OAuth token, so we're going to be using the verify OAuth token. This is going to take in the access token, and second parameter is the request. All right, then next we want to check if in string account.google.com in id underscore info, which is the variable we created, it has a key known as ISS. So what we are checking is if we have this address in this key, so we are verifying the origin of actually what this token is coming from. So we want to really check if it's actually coming from Google. So it has this key ISS, which actually stores the full path like this to where it is coming from. So we are checking if we are having account.google.com. If we have that, we simply want to just return the ID info. All right. So once we verify it, we return the ID info. I think that's all we need to do for this validate method, which is just going to verify that the token is actually coming from Django. So once we've done that, the next utility function that we're going to create here is the register social user, register underscore social user. So this is the function that is actually going to help us create the user on our own database once we have those credentials. So this function is going to take in a couple of parameters, which first of all is going to take in the provider, and second is going to take in an email and the first name, then last name. All right. So once we have this argument passed in, first we want to check if we already have a user created with any of these credentials, maybe the email. All right. So first we're going to say user is from our user model dot objects dot filter, where email is equal to the email that is being passed. We're going to say if user, then if we have a user, or if user dot exist, remember is a query set. So the query set has a method called exist, which is a boolean, which return a boolean value of either true or false if this query returns any kind of data. So if that returns true, the next you want to check is we want to check the provider. So we're going to say if the provider that was supplied, right, matches the provider of the user that exists. So which we're going to say user, which is a query set. We're going to retrieve the very first one because obviously email is unique, so it's going to return only one result. But as far as the query set, it's going to be coming as a list. So we're going to retrieve just the first item, which is the only item inside. Dot auth provider, which is the feed from our database. Remember, we updated our database to have auth provider. All right. If that is the case, we don't need to create the user ID We just need to log in the user. So that's the more reason why we imported our authenticate method. So what we simply do is we're going to say login user equals to our authenticate method. We're going to pass in the email equals to the email that's supplied. Then the password is going to equals our settings.social auth password. So we are going to create a password for them from our settings that they are going to be using. All auth services are going to be using that same password. So I've not created that password yet, so let me just grab this name and move over to my settings. All right, so under this place I can simply just create that variable auth settings, which is going to be the password, so I can still put it in an environment variable. So in my environment variable file, I will just create that password. So for now, let me just put some random string. All right, in this case. All right. Then once we authenticate the user, we can simply return our object just the same way we return it when we're creating a user. So let's go to our account app serializer. Okay, so this respond, let's just grab this respond and bring it over to our UTs. So the same respond, but we're going to change the parameter. So if the user is authenticated, we return this respond while the email becomes our login user.email. Then the same thing, login user.get full name. We already have all this in our normal authentication. Then the token, here we are going to say login user.token. All right, login user.token. We are calling this our token function from our model. Remember, we have a token from our models. All right, user token to get access, user token. So this will now be a respond. Then if the provider does not match, we want to raise our authentication error. Remember, we have authentication error, and this authentication error, we want to provide the detail, which is please continue your login with. So what we are doing here is, now in this case where the provider does not match, it means that the user is already a registered member of our platform, but is trying to log in with a provider that he did not use earlier when creating his account. So this is us telling the person to please continue your login with your actual provider. So continue with your own provider instead of trying to use this new provider. So that's the first S block. Then the second S block is in the case where the user does not exist. That means it's a new user. So in that case, we want to create an account for the user. So say new user equals to an object where the first key is email. That is going to be our email. Then the password. All right, so once we have this new user data, we can create a new user now by simply calling our user.objects.create. So because we have our data as a dictionary, we can easily just spread the new user. All right, so this will now create the new user for us. Then we can also store this in a variable called new user, or just call it registered user. So then we can decide to return our payload now, because now we are creating the user from scratch. All right, so once we do that, don't forget you also want to add the auth provider. So we'll say register.auth provider, and this we want to set this to our provider. And lastly, we want to say register user.isVerified, and this we want to set it to true. All right, so every user that are coming from either Google or this, automatically they are verified. All right, then once we do that, we can now say register user.save. Then lastly, we want to also log them in as well. So let's just grab everything from the respond up to the login part. So we'll grab this. So yeah, login user with the email and our password, then generate the token and the respond as well. All right, so let's go over what we just did in this register social user. So I know the function is kind of a very large function, and then this is not a good practice to put everything in here to make a function this big. So we can actually refactor this and maybe break it into separate function. Like if you want to do something like that, you can just take in the logic of logging in the user, since we are repeating the same process after and when the user is already created and when we are creating a new user. So you can just take that out and put that in a separate function. Maybe you can just create another function here, login user, or just login user, or any name of your choice. which is obviously expecting an email and a password, and that we can just grab this whole part of the logic, can cut this out and put this one here. All right, then in here we can now set password, variable password. We want to set it equals to, or better still, we can just take this out and pass in password. Sorry, password equals the password that has been passed as an argument. All right, so we can have this separate function does this, and then we call it user, and in here we call it user. All right, and here we can change the name not to confuse it with our function. All right, so that's fine. Then we can now, anywhere we need that logic in here, we can call our login user. So we can say authenticated or auth user is equals to our login user, which is expecting the email, and the password is expecting is our settings dot social auth password. All right, we don't even need to store it in variable because we are not using the variable. The calling of this login function, which is this function that we create here, is taking an email and a password and is returning a dictionary. So the function which we are now calling in this place is returning the dictionary for us. We can also do the same thing here because we are still using the same logic here. So we can cut this out and then call our login user, and here we are passing in our email. This time will now be, sorry, we didn't even put X here, so the S part when the user does not exist. So let's push this in. So here we want to log in, which is expecting an email. Once is equals to the register user dot email, and the password is going to be our settings. All right, so this is how we can break things down. All right, so this is how we can break things down. So I'm just double checking and make sure that everything is fine. So we register the user, we set the auth provider, make it verified, we save it, and we log in the user. So let's call this login social user. Login social user. Let's go and rename that function. I think this is a better login social user. All right, so we refer to this function and it's doing what we want it to do. All right, so we can save this. So the next thing we want to do now is to go over to our serializer file. Let's save our settings as well. In our serializer.py file, we've created the serializer.py file. Let's create a simple serializer inside our social authentication. In this serializer file, we're going to import from REST framework serializer, and we're also going to import that Google class that we created, so which is from .jwt. We want to import Google class. I also want to import our register social user. So we still want to import Django settings, so from django.conf. Then we also need to import REST and the framework session. We want to import our auth field. Alright, so here we're going to create a simple serializer class, which we're going to call Google signing serializer. Alright, which is going to be serializer class, and the data that we are expecting is just one, which is our access, which we call access token, and this is going to be a serializer.traffic. You can just provide a mail length. Alright, so here we are going to define validate access token. Remember in REST framework, Django REST framework, we can provide validations for our serializers in two ways, whether you are validating a single feed or you are validating the whole data schema. So if you are validating a single string, you just put validate the name, a single feed, validate with the name of the feed that you want to validate. So this takes in self and the data, which is access token. So this is where we want to call that our validate method that we have in our utils.py file. Google underscore user data is going to come from our google.validate. All right, our google.validate, which is going to validate our access token. And when this validate our access token, we're going to put a try and set block. All right, so let's say try. So if there's an exception, we want to simply raise serializer dot validation error with a simple message of this token is invalid or has expired. So if typo here. So if the token is validated, we can get the ID of the user from this with the key of sub. This will retrieve the ID for us. All right, we say this will retrieve the user ID from Google. So here, where we are checking and we are returning validating error. Then after that, next we want to check the client. All right, inside the part of the data that comes with the ID token, there is a value called audience, which we are going to use to check the client ID to make sure that the token is not being sent from a malicious app. You can always check the docs is there. So we also say if our Google user has a key called Auth, which stands for audience, we want to check if the audience is not equals to our settings dot Google underscore client ID. All right, which is our client ID in our settings. This Google client ID. So that's a way for Google to verify the client that is making the request. So the value of the client is actually stored in this key called audience, but in Auth. So we are checking if the client does not match the ID. We want to raise an authentication fee, and here we'll provide a detail of could not verify user. All right. Then if everything is fine, we can retrieve our user data. All right. So under here, we can retrieve our user data. So the email is going to be coming from our Google user data for the value of email. That gives us the email. Then the user's first name in Google is coming with the key of giving name. So that's what Google call it, giving underscore name. That's the key. Then last name is coming with family name, family underscore name. So that's the key. So now we'll retrieve all the data from the profile. Once we have those data, we can easily call at this point, we can call our register. So here we can just say provider is equals to Google. And here we'll simply return our register social auth. And we pass in the provider will be our provider that we define. Then the email, our email, the first name, our own first name, and the last name, our own last name. All right. So this does the job for us in case of the serializer. So it's just helping us calling that our validate method that we created, so we can retrieve the profile information, checking the client that is making the request to make sure that it's not a malicious app that is actually giving us this token. So by testing against our client ID. So if you go to the docs, we're verifying ID token, you see them here. Look at it. The value for Auth in the ID token is equals to your apps client IDs. All right, so you can see that there. So see the value for ISS in the ID client is equals to. So you can check everything are here and get them from the docs. All right, so that's what we need to do here. We call that register method, which will do the rest for us. So we can save this, and next we need to create our API route. All right, so in our views.py, we are going to be using a generic view. So we're going to simply import from REST framework.generics. We want to import the generic API view, and also we want to import the serializer that we created. So we'll say from .serializer, we'll import the Google serializer, Google sign-in serializer. So let's also import respond. So we'll say from REST framework, from REST framework, import status. Okay, so we're going to create a very simple basic class-based view, which we're going to call Google sign-in view, which is extending generic API view. So the serializer class, we set the serializer class equals to our Google serializer. Then here we're going to define a simple post request, taking the request, just our normal basic view. All right, so we say serializer is equals to self.serializer class, where the data is equals to request.data. So we want to say serializer.isValid, then raise exception, we want to make that true. All right, so this is valid is what we're going to call our serializer validator method, and this is the only method that we have in this serializer class. So this will actually validate and also return the data for us, so we can get the final data from here. Let's just wrap it in a close, and then we can get it from serializer serializer.validated data. Outside that, we want to access the token. All right, so what we are doing here is, by default, if we are using serializer validator, there are two ways we illustrate. We use validator method here in any serializer when you're working with Django REST framework. Now you're using this validator class that handles the full dictionary validator. When we are doing that, if we want to get the validated data, we get it as a dictionary. But this is a single feed validator. So this is not coming as a dictionary. So that's why we are trying to access the data. Let me just wrap everything. So this will give us the data, then we can return a respond, and the response we want to return the data, and the status is going to be our status.htp200. all right, so we can save this and then create the URL for this. Let's create a url.py file inside our social authenticate social account. urls.py, so we say from django.urls we want to import path. Here we can define the path. So the path this time we just go to Google. When it goes to Google, we want to call that, we'll save from Google sign in view. All right, we save this, and we need to bring this into the project level URLs. All right, yeah, just the same way we have this. We're going to repeat the same thing, but this time is not going to be accounts.url but social account.urls. all right, so I guess that's all we need to do for the backend. So what we need to do next is to spin up our React application so we can start connecting our APIs to our React client. All right, so we're going to create a simple React client. We are going to be using Vite. All right, so I'm going to open a bash terminal in the same location where our backend end is. So I've created a folder called frontend. So I'm just moving into the folder called frontend. So once we move into that folder called frontend, in here we are going to create, so we're going to say npm create vite at latest. Then we're going to put dots to specify the current directory, dash dash, then dash dash template. We're going to specify React. All right, so let's hit enter. So this is going to take in some time. All right, wow, that's great, that's fast. I guess there are some folders there. So what we need to run is npm install. So we're going to say npm install. Okay, our installation is complete. So what we want to do now is also install React Router DOM. So we're going to say npm install React Router DOM, but this time we are going to install version 6.4.0. all right, so this is also finished installing. So we're going to also install npm install Axios. I think Axios we're going to be using version 1.1.3. all right, so that's the three basic package that we need. So we're going to open this in another code editor so that we can focus on the front end. So in this place, what we're going to do is we're not going to complicate issues. We're going to create a very basic, simple front-end component to actually just show you how we can use our Auth service. So inside our source, let's just create a component folder. Then in the app.js, let's set up our basic routes for login, logout, and then other routes. So let's just clear up everything that is here. We don't need all these logos. We can take them out. Okay, we can start from here. So we are going to import browser router, rename it as router. Then we want to import routes and routes. Like I said, we're going to keep everything very basic. So we're going to say router, and within our router we want a route. And here we have our individual route. all right, and the path slash and the element is going to be sign up. We've not created this yet, so let's quickly create the files. So in our component, we're going to create signup.js, and we're going to create also for login and the rest. all right, so we have some files. We can start with this. Later on we'll create others. So let's just go to sign up and let's just start a React component. all right, we have those basic components. Within this component folder, we'll just create a simple index.js, and we import all these. Import first is sign up, then import login, import profile, and import forget password. all right, so in here we can import all of them. So import from /component, then in here we can just bring all in. sign up, login, profile, verify email, forget password. All right, so all of them can just come from component folder. Then in here we can start rendering them. So let me just duplicate these rats. So the last one is going to slash login, and the component we're going to change it to login. So this goes to dashboard, verify email, go to slash OTP slash verify. All right, so the last is for forget password, and the component as well, we change it to forget password. All right, so these are the basic routes. You can save this. Oh, so I believe many of you are actually familiar with React. All right, so what we are doing here is we are creating a different wrap. We are using React router DOM. So we are importing the browser router, and we are renaming it as router, and we are importing the rats and the routes. So that's what we are using here to specify our routes. So for the CSS, I'm going to just grab the CSS I have and paste them in here. So I'm going to bring in the basic CSS that I have for this simple React application. All right, so this is CSS for all of the different pages that we're going to create. And if you want to use my own CSS, you can get this particular CSS from the docs. But aside that, you can also write your own CSS if you want. But this is just basic CSS, basic layout CSS. So that's all. So let's go to the sign up page and start creating our sign up form. So here I'm going to create a simple div, and within I'm going to create another div, and here we're going to have an h2 tag. Just call it create account. So I'm going to have a font tag. I'm going to make it very basic. There are more we can do when it comes to React, but I'm going to make it very basic React. So in here we're going to have so first of all, let's bring in the use state. We're going to use state here. All right, so in the form here we're going to create the feeds for the different inputs. So the first input is going to be the email input, so we're going to paste that. So we have a form group, a label is email address, and the input type test with a class of email form name. So we're going to duplicate this particular form, so let's just duplicate it. So the first one after email, we have first name, so I'm going to call it first name, and the input should be, the name should be first name, last name, and the password and the password confirm. So this, let's change it from test to password. Then we can duplicate this one more time to confirm password. Feeds that we want in this form, and lastly we're going to put in the submit button, which is also an input of type submit, value submit, with a class of submit button as well. So let's save this, and let's start our React app so I can try it out and see if we are getting this sign up form. So let's run our React app by running npm run dev. All right, oops, I think we're having some issues. Let's confirm what is happening. Say error, the JSS syntax extension is not currently enabled. Okay, I think we need to rename our files to JSS. All right, so sorry about that, that's on me. So let's just quickly name all our files here to JSS. All right, I've renamed all of them back to JSS, and you can see my put control and click. Okay, we are still having some import. It's a fail to resolve import. Guys is complaining about my import, so let's quickly check where that's coming from. Within component have index.ass. All right, where we are importing, import forget password from forget password. All right, I failed to put that dot slash. I guess that's the reason. So let's go back and see. Okay, let's give the class name. So this is holding a class name of form dash container, and this has a class of wrapper. All right, so let's save this, come back, something is still wrong. All right, so in here let's give just a style of 100% like this, and let's refresh this. The issue is the global CSS that came with the React project is intercepting with our own CSS, so we have to take this out. This is the one that came with the React project that was created, so we don't need it, so we can just take it out and save. So if we go back to our form now, you can see our form is displaying properly as expected. All right, so that's fine. So this is what we are looking for. So back to our sign up page. Once we have our form and all that, just below the form we can put an h3 of call this or we want to put the sign up GitHub and the same thing sign up with Google. We're going to change this to Google. All right, so this one is GitHub container, then this one is Google container, then this can take a class of test option. All right, but later on we'll actually replace this with the right way of generating the sign up with Google button. All right, I guess our buttons are displaying okay. We have the sign up with GitHub, but that of Google is not displaying properly. But we'll get all this to work later on when we are ready for the sign up with Google and the sign up with GitHub. So what we want to do now is render other pages as well. Then before we start processing this form to connect it with our backend API. So let's create the page for the verify email and also the login as well. So in the verify email page, which is going to be very simple, in here we're going to create a form container as well. So we're going to have a div, and within this div we're going to have a form, and this form we just have one form feed. All right, which is the OTP. Enter your OTP, the test, and the name is OTP, and don't forget to put in a close. All right, that's for the form. Then we need a submit button as well, so we're going to have an input for submit, send, and this one is going to be type of submit. Then we're going to have a class of vButton or vBTM. So all these class name, I already have CSS for this last name. Then also this, we're going to give it a class name of form-container. All right, so this will be for the verify page, verify email as well. So let me bring in use state. We're going to use use state, bring in use state, save this. All right, so that's for the verify page. So let's visit the route and see how this displays. So if we go to /OTP/verify, all right, so we have the basic enter your OTP form. Now we accept your OTP and hit send. So that's fine. So we have two pages done already, this sign up page and the verify OTP page. So let's quickly do this one of these login page as well. So the login page is quite similar to that of the sign up, just that it has two forms. So we're going to just grab everything here and take it over to the login page, paste them here, then remove the ones that are not needed. We don't need this. We'll take out the parts. All right, so balanced. So we have just two feeds, two input feeds, so email address, and this we're going to change this to password, and we can change the type to password as well, and the name should be password as well. I guess that's all we need to do for now for the UI. So I can also bring in the use state. We're going to use it later on. So I can save this, and instead of create account, we change this one to login. All right, login. So we can save this, and then we'll test out the login route. So let's go to /login and see what we have. So if we go to /login, all right, we have a basic login form. So let's bring in the button as well. So let's just grab the button that we have for our login page, and paste that here and change the value to login. All right, so if we come back, okay, we have a basic login form. I think we are good to go. We have our login page, we have our sign up page, and we have our verify email page. So let's start with these three first. All right, I'm going to stop the video here because of time. In our next video, we'll start connecting our backend to our front end. So for this video, we've successfully set up our React front end, and we've created the pages for login, sign up, and also for the verified page. All right, so time is already fast spent. In our next video, we'll pick up from here. All right, guys, don't forget to subscribe and don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. See you guys in the next video.